right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started, knowing that some folks might still be joining us in the next couple minutes. But we're a pretty experienced crew now, so we know how to get going with our morning. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Nicole Bryant-Lesher, College of the Redwoods, and the amazing Rebecca Moonstone is with me as well this morning. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. How are you?
We're going to talk all about annotation with you today. On our way to that Google document, a moment of pause at our community agreements. Between this week and last week, anything new bubble up for you? Any new suggestions that we should add to our list? Or if this is feeling really good and solid, I invite you just to take a moment, read these back over. It helps prime us and remind us for how we want to be with one another when we're learning here today. As always, know we can come back here anytime. We can add to these at any point. It's a living document that comes alongside with us as we're learning together. So you know what to do at this moment. If you've not yet bridged and made that leap over to the Google document, it is waiting and excited to see you. Links in the chat. When you get there, you'll know that it's the right week because it'll say annotating student work. Have you found that that's your Zoom and Google Life yet? That you're not sure where you're supposed to be until the Google document tells you what it is you're supposed to do? Sometimes I feel that way. So if you've got that open, fantastic. Think too about anything that you might want to have open, that you can look at, that you might want to reference. If you have, whether in hard copy or digital copy, or maybe on Canvas, something that can remind you of ways in which you currently use margin writing to talk to students. And maybe this is pre-COVID, right? Think back to the kind of comments you used to put in the paper margins back in those days when students handed us papers by hand. We wrote on them. If you have anything nearby to help jog your memory, help you think about what are those comments that you commonly put in and around where students have written, that can be a useful reference to have for our learning today. And if nothing's easily at hand, no worries. Last but not least, a space for note-taking and some way to do that, whether that's a pen because you're taking notes the good old-fashioned way, or whether that's an open digital document that'll help capture your thinking. Knowing that our Google document's going to be there at all times to bring you back to that learning. The amazing Keelan has not yet released our session 3 recording to me, but I'm sure it is in process, and as soon as it arrives at my digital doorstep, I will send it to you as well. This session is also being recorded, so takes a couple weeks, but know that you'll have the Google document and these recordings to support your learning long after our session is done. And with that, let's go ahead and head over to that Google document. If you've not already done so, I invite you to start adding your name, your college, and then again, this table's looking at I got and I need, right? So in that I got space, something you've learned from our previous sessions, or something you already know, something you feel really solid with or believe about giving feedback on student work by writing on it, right? Or in this case, typing on it. So this could be something you know about what's worked for you in terms of giving feedback in the margins back in those days when you wrote on the margins of a student assignment. It could be something you know about doing this in Canvas. Or it could be something else, something about rubrics or feedback that you've now gathered from our previous sessions. So what's coming in with you today? What have you already got? Feel free to finish up your last couple sentences, knowing that we're going to come back to this table. I'm going to move my screen over to where we're going to be going in our PowerPoint. I attach this PowerPoint every week into that working library that you have, and I just add, so it's all together. One less thing to have to open. All right, so to anchor us before I model a few things in Canvas, I just wanted to think a little bit theoretically about annotation, right? If we're thinking about annotation as feedback, in session 2, when we talked about feedback, we talked a lot about how feedback can be, I guess we did this in rubrics too, right? How feedback can be a way in which we explain a grade to a student. At its most basic level, feedback can be a way in which we explain a grade. But feedback has the potential to do so much more in our relationship with our students, right? It can be the way in which we motivate students to continue to try. It can be the way in which we norm that trying and struggling is part of learning. It can be the way in which we notice our students, we validate their work, we see where their passions and their interests lie, right? So it can be part of the way in which we dialogue with our students as people, beyond how we dialogue with the work that they have submitted, right? And that's mission critical if we want our students to continue to try, especially now, right? In the time of COVID, where it can feel hard to be motivated and our students are jumping some huge barriers. Thinking about that feedback as dialogue might change how we approach the way in which we utilize those feedback tools. As a seasoned English teacher, I've been teaching English for 15, that doesn't even seem possible, but it's true, 15 years. I have done a lot of grading in my life, of a lot of papers. And never have I said, wow, that was smooth, easy, and fast. Like, that's just not possible. I got into the wrong discipline for that. But what I can say is that I figured out over the years how to make the choice to write on student work, to dialogue directly with what they've written, work for me more smoothly, right? More efficiently, more effectively. And I think that that's really paramount, right? When we choose to write on student work, to comment on their work directly, that feedback needs to work for us as teachers, and it needs to work for our students. And so, depending upon how you came into your field of teaching and learning, you may have had examples in graduate school or other places where there were these really elaborate feedback methods that happened between students and teachers. This is certainly true in English. And those teachers might have a total, they were teaching grad students. They might have a total of 20 students. In an average semester, I have 120. What you can do for 20 students is not realistically what you can do for 120. So it has to work for you and it has to work for your students. Otherwise, it doesn't work for either, right? So here are some things that help feedback to work for you and for your students. That feedback needs to be clear and precise. And you as the writer can help with that, right? The more that you can start to lean into what's going to be really clear and what's going to be really precise, the more your students can translate that feedback into actions that they want to take. I would really suggest that your feedback needs to be focused on strengthening your next steps. If it's simply communicating the grade, the number of their grade does that. So if you want to do more than give the number on the grade, that feedback really should be directed on strengthening our next steps, because that's going to motivate students to continue to try, which is what learning is all about. You try again, you get stronger. And for you, as a grader, it's got to be manageable in terms of time and scope. It has to be something you feel you can do without losing your entire life to doing it. And for students, it needs to be manageable in time and scope. If they open that assignment that you've commented on, and every line has feedback, it is overwhelming as a reader. Overwhelming to take in. So for both you and your students, that dialogue that happens on their work in the margins needs to be manageable in terms of time and scope to take in what's there or to produce what's there if it's you. I think it's also useful to think about the fact that when students come to your class and they come to you as a person who gives feedback, they are coming in with years of existing experience and schema, right? You're not the first person who's given them feedback on work. You're not the first person who's written on a paper for them. And I think that this matters because when students engage with your feedback, there's a really good chance that no matter what you wrote, that place of receiving feedback from a teacher is activating existing schema. And so it can be really helpful for you to remember that when your students are reading your comments, they're reading them through glasses of their previous educational experiences, right? They're reading that through the lenses of those past experiences. And this is made doubly challenging when we're working online, when we're not physically present at the moment when they read those comments. Because there is a place of disconnect. It's really easy for a comment that you've made to be translated by a student reader into something you did not say, maybe something more negative than what you said, because it's coming through that context of their past learning experiences. So just being aware of that as someone who's giving feedback is going to help when you start to think about, how do I want to say this? Or what's most important to bring forward? And how can I check in with my students to see, did they read what I wrote? And how did they interpret what I wrote, right? What happened next for them after they got that feedback? One way to do this really well, I think, and it may seem counterintuitive because it takes a little bit of time first, but it's worth it, is to make something called a feedback plan before you begin grading, right? So instead of thinking about the tool for giving the feedback or the pen and the paper as being the first thing that happens when you go to comment on student work, think about how you'd like to build a plan for doing that every time that you do it. And as part of that plan, I'd suggest it's worth thinking about the total time you want to dedicate each round of working on assessments. So if you have 35 student papers, it's inhumane to think you're going to do all 35 at once. So how much time are you going to do each time you sit down to work on that group of papers or on that group of assignments, right? And then as you do this more, you can start to kind of finite the corners of, how much total time per student submission are you going to do? And you might not always play by the rules you've set for yourself, but just thinking about it is going to help make this process a little bit more manageable. So how long are you going to work on each smaller group or batch of student work? And then ideally, what's that range of time that you want to spend per student submission? And this is getting back to making it manageable for you, right? And I'll show you how to model this. I have an example for you. I'll share in our session. What are some steps that you want to take when you engage with student work that are going to really continue, again, to focus on clarity and specificity, making it manageable for you and students, and making sure that the feedback you give motivates them to continue to learn towards next steps and try. Okay? What are some steps you'll take to check yourself and your feedback progression as you work? Right? If it's a big, lengthy assignment, it's going to take, and you've got 30, 40 students, it's going to take hours of your life. And there's a good chance that papers 20 through 25, you might be in a different headspace than when you did papers 1 through 8. So what are some steps that you can do to kind of check that whenever you get to that student's paper, you're having a similar type of feedback experience with that student as you did with earlier and later students that you work with for that assignment. The more times you use a similar plan, the more you'll learn about yourself and feel on top of your grading process. So the more times you practice this, the more it's really going to help you to start to learn things about yourself as a giver of feedback. And that can be really useful. So make it manageable, make a plan, and we'll get to these suggestions after we model a few things. So here we are back in my baking show. I've built us an assignment, and I went into my, I built us a fake assignment we're going to look at, and then I went in on student view and I uploaded an assignment as if I were a student to this fake assignment, so that when I go to click on this essay on the Brontosaurus, because sauropods are cool, and they are, right? Long necks, very powerful legs, lawnmowers of the dinosaur species. We can see how we're going to annotate that paper. So although I could get there through clicking on this assignment, I like to try and make the same moves every time. So I'm going to go to grades, which is going to take me to my gradebook. And I'm going to scroll over to that assignment. Here it is. And again, if this was a regular class, lots of students over here on the left. Because it's a fake class, only one student. And there's that icon under this assignment, which shows me that there's something in there for me to take action on, right? I have not yet assessed this. If I had assessed it, I'd see a score. I've not yet assessed it, so I know it's just waiting for me there. So I can click on that assessment for that first student. And if I wanted to, I could just give a score, but I know that I want to give feedback. So in order to do that, I'm going to choose that arrow on the right. It's going to open up this bar over here on the right for me. And I'm going to choose that hallway in to know more about this assessment, known as Speed Grader, right underneath the name of the assignment. And because this was an assignment where students had to upload a file, right? And that could be it can be any file. There are many types of files that you would be able to take action on directly on the file. So a student could upload a PDF. A student could upload a Word doc. A student could open an open text doc. There's lots of file types that are compatible. What is not compatible is a .pages doc from a Mac. So for your students who have Macs, just remind them to save that Mac doc as a docx or a PDF, or have them work in Google Docs. Because that .pages, you're just going to get a blank screen here. So what I will typically do when students submit, even though I tell them this multiple times, is I'll do a quick scan through. Before I start grading, I'll do a quick scan through and just look. Folks have uploaded stuff. So I'll just come through and see, does everything open? Do I get any wonky files? Canvas will allow you to limit the type of file uploads if you want to. Personally, I find that is more work than helpful, because it ends up not allowing students to submit something and then students don't know what to do. And I'd rather they upload a file that doesn't work and then I got to go back and forth with them, which is still a pain, but I'd rather that and that they uploaded something or tried to, than for them to try and upload, have Canvas say no, and maybe they don't try again, and I don't know they ever tried, right? I would rather know they tried and it didn't work, and then we figure it out together. So if they've uploaded, and again, it could be a PDF. So let's say you have them, you want them to handwrite a lab report, or they print out an image on their printer and you want them to make notes in the margins about that image. Maybe they took an image of a piece of art that they have made, and then they're writing on the sides to explain their process to you. Imagine those assignments you used to do face-to-face. It could be something they make on a word processing program, but it could also be something that they take a photo of, right? Or print out, and then using their phone with a free app, like, let me tell you what mine is called. It's not an advertisement for them, but I do find it to work very well. Mine is called Adobe Scan. I'll pop that name into the chat for you. Pop that in there. So I use a program called Adobe Scan. Come here, a little typing. There we go. That's what it's called for mine. I have a Samsung. I'm not sure what if the name is the same for an iPhone. But what it can do is I can take a photo and then I can turn that photo into a PDF. And so this is super helpful for your students, because if there's something that they're doing in the real world that they would physically typically hand into you, they can take a photo of it and they can turn it into a PDF, and that PDF is 100 times clearer. And the file works much better than if they tried to upload a photo. So it's worthwhile to make the suggestion to them. It makes their lives easier, gives you more options for giving feedback. So let's imagine that one of those routes has happened. They've either typed something as a word processing document and they've uploaded it, a paper, a homework assignment, whatnot, or they've uploaded a PDF from a photo that they took, or some type of three-dimensional something, or they've taken a photo of their notes that they did from a lecture that you gave, and they hand wrote them, turned them into a PDF, uploaded them. But they've uploaded something. If they've uploaded something and the file is compatible, then what you're going to have is a split screen where you can see the student work on the left, and all of those grading and feedback situations that we've looked at previously are going to be on the right. But today our attention is on the left. So Canvas calls this split screen on the left. Hang on, I would tell you, but now I've forgotten. It's got a special name. Doc Viewer, there we go. Canvas calls this Doc Viewer. So if you're reading something like the guides that I've put in as our resource and you're wondering what the heck Doc Viewer is, it's the technical term for what Canvas calls when you can see the document in the split screen. So once you've got this here, there's a number of annotation tools available to you across the top. So all the stuff on this gray bar are tools that you can engage with to be able to give feedback on student work. So I'm just going to walk you through what I see here. On the far left is the option to download. So if for whatever reason I didn't want to work with this online, I could download it. Back in a land where I was in the office, I might download and print every so often. Right? But if I'm going to be doing my annotation work online, then it's everything to the right of the expansion arrow. So this arrow takes us to full screen or smaller. So it's all these tools to the right. So the tool on the farthest left, the selection tool, if that's clicked, it just means I'm navigating with my mouse. And as I do in every session, just another plug, buy yourself a $12 mouse. It makes working in Canvas so much easier than trying to use your finger on the trackpad. Right. That mouse could be corded or uncorded, wireless, but a mouse is worth it, especially when you get into doing this work. So if you click on this arrow, it simply means that you can navigate with your mouse, nothing else is going on. To the right of that arrow is something that looks like a hot air balloon. This is called point annotation. Check out what happens when I click on it. When I click on it, everything over here on the left, I get this new bar of colors. Okay. These are all different colors that I could use to give feedback. My go-to color is blue. My spouse calls himself color deficient, right? Meaning, reds, greens, it's all the same to him. So I keep that in mind, and I use dark blue or I use black. As a long-term writing instructor, I would deeply advocate never, 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 never use red. Red is a color that tells its own story when your students read it. They do not read your words, they read the color, and they assume that they've done a bad job. You could write in red, "This is the most amazing thing I've ever read." And their initial reaction, and the research on it, will be different than what you've said. Because there's such a negative connotation with red ink. So thank goodness you have so many other choices you could use, right? Dark blue is super solid. People can see it. Black works great. One of those dark colors. I don't really like purple, but there is a dark purple. Maybe you love it. That would work too. Point annotation. You take your, turns your mouse into this hot air balloon. You just take it someplace and you drop it. Wherever you drop that point, it's going to tell the student, hey, look right here in the document, and it opens up a comment box. So maybe what I want to say right here is something like, good examples to show what you mean about less activities available in Wyoming. I lived in Wyoming for a long time. There are many activities available, but there are limited shopping malls and fancy restaurants, unless you're in Jackson. So point dropping is just going to move you through. You can drop a comment anywhere you want. If you decide that you want to change your comment, you can always click back into it and edit it. You can also choose the trash barrel to get rid of it. So if you want to put in a comment, that's how the comment function works. Over next is the highlight function. So if I want to bring attention to an entire sentence, or I want to show the organization of a couple things, I might choose to use the highlight function. Again, when I choose my highlighter, I'm going to get all these colors over here. So maybe for highlight here, I'm going to use this lighter blue. And I just take my mouse and I drag it along, and it's going to highlight however much I have. A word of note for your own frustration purposes, sometimes highlighting right next to a page break is really tough. You can get the 2 above and maybe the 1 below, but the scrolling plus highlighting can be a little problematic for Canvas to keep up with. But you can highlight those lines, and then it gives you this black box to the right. You can click on that black box and it gives you a comment box. So I could use this highlight function to say really powerful idea here if I wanted to capture a couple sentences, right? Or I could do something that says something like, consider saying this second. And then I could come down here a couple sentences, choose a different color, and say, consider saying this first. So back in that time when we were all in classrooms with each other, it was super easy to walk over to a student with a paper and stand next to them, right? Or kind of lower yourself down next to their desk and say, okay, what if you moved these 2 things in a different order, right? Or if they had a couple paragraphs and those ideas were sort of mismatched up and you really thought that they needed to do a little bit of work to put similar stuff together. That was a lot easier to do when you're right with them and you can use your finger and show them. It's harder to do when you're annotating digitally, but the highlight function helps because you can color code, right? And if, like for whatever reason happened here, Canvas put them both in the same color and you're like, wait a minute, I wanted this in a different color. You can click on it, come up and choose the highlight function again and change the color on something. So if I had a super long paragraph from a student and I saw that there were 3 times where they were saying things that really should be sitting together and they're separate, I could go through that paragraph and highlight each one of those blue. And then highlight the yellow stuff yellow. And then make an overall comment that says, what might happen if you put the blue stuff together and the yellow stuff together in your next draft? How might that impact this for a reader? And help them see what I see and those places where they could better organize. The center tool is free text annotation. So let's say if for whatever reason a student has used an incorrect term. This is super useful if they're doing an assignment where you're checking to see, do they understand specific in-discipline terminology or jargon, right? And so maybe they've used a word, or like here, let's say that the student said that this certain activity happened with the Sierra Club, but maybe it was the International Hiking Club or something. You can highlight, you can click right above with the text function, and you could put in the correct term. So you could put in here something like International Hiking Club as a way to annotate above their writing to say like, oh wait, I think you've got the wrong term here. My suggestion is to use this limited. It's way harder to read than a comment over in the margins. So if you have something more in depth you want to say, using the point function or the highlight function to create a text box and talk about it on the right-hand margin is more useful. But if it's something quick and short, swapping a term for something else, this text function can work really well. You can adjust the size, make it bigger, bigger, and adjust the color. The next tool that's available is the Strikethrough tool. Notice how the Strikethrough defaults to red. The others don't, but the Strikethrough does. I disagree with Canvas's choice on that. No thanks, Canvas. I'm going to use blue. The Strikethrough works with your mouse. You just set the cursor and pull it to the left or right. My writing teacher experiences say that students do have a really strong gut reaction when they receive their homework back or their papers back from you, and you've sort of said this sentence shouldn't exist by literally writing through it. It's not a tool I use often. I would much rather do a point comment or a highlight and say, this sentence doesn't feel like a good fit here, or whoa, this is going in a different direction. I'm a little confused. Than to make the choice to X out their writing. I think there's lots of ways to get to the same end place. Should the Strikethrough feel like a good fit for that particular situation, you can get that Strikethrough, and it's going to also give you a spot for a comment. So you could say something like, the sentence doesn't feel like a good match for your overall point here. How might you explain the challenges of hiking in another way? To the right of this is a paintbrush feature. This can get super unwieldy fast, but it is here and available. So you can adjust the width of the line from narrow, wider, and super wide, adjust your color, and then basically it's a draw function. So if you needed to circle something, you could. If you wanted to make a really, really crummy looking but humorous smiley face, you could do that. It's not the most technically accurate tool, but like everything else, it's going to allow you to make a choice. You can click the check mark to the left when you're done to set it, knowing you can always click the trash can to eliminate it if you want to. And then you can click on the box to the right if you want to add a comment. I didn't know for a long time that the farthest box to the right was usually a way better choice than the paintbrush. So for years, my students got these circle-y looking things when I wanted to talk about a larger piece of their text. And then I learned, oh, there's a better way to do that. And it's this box to the far right. If you click on that box, it makes a perimeter that is significantly more attractive looking than my bad circle drawing. So it looks like you just set your point down. It looks like an X, right? A plus. You set that down, and then it's going to give you a box you can expand. Again, you can change that color. So if the highlight function feels a little unwieldy, you could do the same idea of helping a student re-see the organization of their writing by using the boxes, right? You could make one box blue and the next box yellow and another box blue again to say, hey, the blue stuff should go together. It's always going to give you that option to comment on the right. So all of those tools can be used on a paper. One of those tools can be used on a paper. For me personally, I use this box to box out stuff. I use the highlight function, and I use the drop point. Those are my primary tools. Once in a while, I'll find a need to write with the text or the paintbrush now that I know I don't need to use the paintbrush that often. I've got this other tool instead. But those are my general go-tos. In a moment, we're going to look at what this looks like for a student, how they access it. But I'm going to pause here and we'll do questions. Yes, ma'am. I am ready.
Okay, well, you're going to answer in just a few moments about how do these annotations look when the students view them. You said you were going to go over that, but can you attach to an annotation an audio message instead of the textbook message?
I don't think so, but let's look again.
And it also says, how about a file upload?
I don't think you can, because I don't think it's that, what would be the right word for that? Like hyper active, hyper cool. I think it's only written. But know that when your students look at this, they're going to look at, because I'm looking and there's no, let me just check. Nope, it is type function only. However, know that your students get this feedback as a whole package, right? And when we talk about giving a feedback plan, which I'll show you my example in a minute, I would really think about giving feedback as a whole package, right? So you can annotate, but you are also, and your students are going to have that option for audio comments over here, audio or video, and to attach a document over here. And when we look at what this looks like for students, I think you might find that having different routes of giving feedback that are not all on the paper is actually much more manageable for students to process. This becomes very busy very quickly, right? This paper with these annotations becomes very busy very quickly for a student. And so to have a few comments here from you, and then have some audio feedback over here, and then an attachment maybe over here, allows your students to engage with your feedback one layer at a time, rather than having to try and decode it all at once, because it is decoding, right? Much like we talk about with our students, that when our students write, it makes perfect sense in their heads. And then when we read it, sometimes there's that moment of mismatch where we don't understand what they're saying. They understand it, but we don't. That road travels both ways, right? When we give feedback, It makes total sense to us what we're saying here, but it always requires a step of decoding for our students. And so just because we think these comments make complete sense doesn't mean that it's going to make complete sense to our students. They're still going to have to decode it. And when they decode, they're decoding with those previous experience eyes, right? They're reading through those lenses of their previous feedback. And so that's just a third party in the room when you're having that conversation with your student. And so the more ways in which you can kind of make smaller but separate each way of feedback to them, kind of doles it out in smaller doses, less likely to overwhelm, more likely they're going to hear you clearly. More questions. What do we got? Oops, I think you might be muted. There you go.
Yes. I said, no, there aren't any for right now anymore.
Okay. Okay, well, let's go look at what this looks like for students, which is never an exciting moment, right? We're going to go there and you're going to be like, geez, Louise, this is what they have to do. But we're used to that now. We know how to help them through it, right? So more important than maybe any other time when you give feedback, if you're going to use these annotation tools, you want to make sure that you've got a video and some instructions for how your student should interact with this, because I can guarantee to you they will never know that your annotations are there unless you tell them and show them how to find them. It's bananas how hard it is to find for a student. All right, so let's back out here of our gradebook. We come back home. And then let's see what students see. So, oh, you know what? I want to do one more thing so that you can see the whole grading package on that assignment. So bear with me for just one moment, please. So I think it's more, powerful to see what it looks like when they do have multiple ways of feedback happening at once. Some of you might be wondering, does the browser that I have make any difference on how I annotate, right? Chrome and Firefox work really well with annotations. Firefox is probably the smoothest, but Chrome's come a long way. I use Chrome and it's fine. But Chrome and Firefox are smoothest. If you've got another browser and you're noticing that some of your tools or your functionality is not working well, check your browser and change it. That might be the problem. So I attached a rubric to this sample assignment because we were doing rubrics last week. So let's say I annotated this paper and I'm also completing the rubric. Notice I did not say then I would complete the rubric, because when we talk about your grading plan, I would actually suggest that you do the rubric first and then you come in and give comments. But we'll get to that in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's say I filled out my rubric, I hit save. I didn't set my rubric to auto score points, so I'm going to add my points. Maybe let's assume that I've added a written comment as well. That's going to go right here. I'm going to submit that. And we're just going to go do the whole thing here. I'm going to give my students some audio comments as well as those written comments. Here those come. I'm going to save that. Look how much you all know how to do now. This is so many ways you can give them feedback. If I had wanted to, I could have done speech to text comments. And for the heck of it, let's just attach something. Let's just go for it. Let's just go for it. Say I've got maybe an overall suggestions document that I'm also uploading. I chose it, I hit the paperclip, I chose what I wanted, and then I hit submit, and that's going to attach it right down there. Okie dokie. So now my students have so many ways of feedback from me. Now let's go look at what that looks like. I'm going to back out, come back to my home space. To see what my students see, as always, I need to go over to settings. Far down on my list, Move my head over here, and then over on my right, I'm going to choose Student View. When the purple perimeter shows up, I know I have arrived at what my students would see, or as close of an approximation as I can get on Canvas. So we just graded that paper, right? So if my student came into my class, they're going to see this 1, which says, oh, you got something graded. And probably that means they're going to click on it. So then when they come in here, they're going to see everything that's been graded for them. But if they've looked at their other graded stuff before, the new thing they haven't looked at is going to have a blue dot to the left. I don't consider this to be, you know, a giant jumping up and down thing in any way. So you can always send out a weekly announcement when you're done grading and say this particular assignment, name it by what it's called, has been graded. Go into that assignment to know more. And that's a great place in your announcements to say, remember, I used a rubric and I put comments right on your papers. So make sure you fully open the assignment in your gradebook. You can always link those steps that either Canvas gives you or I've given you right to that announcement to remind them how to do it. So when your students get there, they don't see anything. 0 things tell them that you just annotated that assignment. They know that you left a comment. That shows on the right over here. They can see their grade. They know there's a rubric. There is literally nothing that tells them that you annotated. So another thing I would suggest is that week 1 of your class, you have them do an activity where they submit something. You do 2 or 3 comments on it, right? Maybe they're telling you something about their past educational experiences or what they're really excited about in your class, something where you're getting to know them as a person. You do it in week 1. Between week 1 and week 2, you annotate it. And then an assignment in week 2 is that they come in, they look at your feedback, and they either post in a discussion forum about what your feedback said, right? Or communicate back to you in an email, something to get them to practice looking at your feedback. Because otherwise you might spend all semester giving these amazing comments in their essay or in their homework, and they won't even know that they're there. So if you can build that learning experience into the first couple of weeks of class, they're much more likely to know to go there. That becomes part of their motor memory. And they know that that's a way in which you're going to dialogue with them, is right on their assignments. So in order for them to see it, they need to click on the assignment itself. And even then, what it defaults to showing is, you know, the written comments that you put, the media comment, the attached files. They can talk back to you through a comment here. They still have to click up here to see the rubric. Little tiny blue text. So thank goodness you're going to walk them through. Now they can see the rubric, but they still can't see your comments. In order to see your comments, they need to click on the assignment itself on the left. Oh, that'll download. I just told you a thing that isn't true. Let me find how they see it. I apologize. I thought that's how it worked. Let's see. Why don't I see it?
View feedback.
Fantastic. Where is that?
It's to the right of what they submitted. Like
the rubric covering it right now.
It should be right here. Jill's right. Jill's right. It should be right here. Is it because the rubric isn't there? It should be right here.
It was there before the rubric was.
Was it?
Yeah.
Bananas. Bananas, people. There you go. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, all of you with your eagle eyes, to know that this was here previously. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So yeah, view feedback, tiny, they click on it, and then they're going to do the squint. where here's your assignment. They've got to scroll. They're going to see your comments. Okay. I believe this is the button they want. Let me see. Is that? Yes. Okay. So they could read it right on the screen, but when they view that feedback, they can also choose the download button on the far left. And when they download, let's try it out. It should download the annotated copy. It does. And then I think they can, yep. Then when they read that annotated copy, they can hover over and see your comments. So it is a number of steps for them to get in and look at those annotated comments. It's neither intuitive nor efficient. It's still worth it, but doing a couple assignments early in the semester to help them practice how to do this, super, super, super useful. So let's say you do all of those things and it still isn't working. You've got a student who, you know, whether they're on a tablet or it's just challenging for them to see those comments, you can come in as the instructor and download the annotated comments yourself and send them to your student. So if I leave student view, I can go in to grades. I can go into a particular student. Let me scroll over here. I can go into SpeedGrader. And I'm going to see what I interacted with, right? I'm going to see their paper, my comments, my annotations. And then I believe, give me just 1 second, I got to find it. I want to make sure I get the right one for you. Yeah, let's see. I don't think that's it. So give me just a second. If you know where this thing is that I'm looking for, by all means, unmute yourself and let me know. But there is a way to download. Is it here? There is a way to download with annotations. Give me just a second. I wonder why that's not allowing right now. We'll come back to that. I'm fairly certain it's in the guide that I've written you, but it's now on my list. So for whatever reason, there it goes. I'm finally getting, I don't think that's it though. Let's try this one. Yeah, I don't know why that's not coming up. Okay. I'll put it on my to follow up with you list. There is a way to do it so that you could download that document that your student wrote and your comments and send it to them. So if you end up in a tough spot where a student can't go through the steps on their own gradebook, you can do that for them. I'll move us into a place where you can dialogue with each other in just a minute.
Can I ask
any
a
more
couple
questions?
of questions? Yes, ma'am.
Great. Bring them on,
Okay.
bring them on.
All right. It says, when they talk back to me through a comment, how will I know? Because they just don't want to miss out on that opportunity.
Totally. And again, that's another thing. Oh, sorry that this looks like you're yelling. My apologies. I had my caps lock on. Great question. So what is, and I don't know that I can fully show you. Because email on Canvas is email for everything, right? It's not just email for one class. So if I pull up my email to show you, you would see sensitive student information, but I'll show you where you would go. So to find those comments easily, you can see them when you go into the assignment, but you wouldn't know that they're waiting for you. It's a way in which you look at your email that changes it. So if you go to your inbox, okay, your inbox defaults, there's a couple drop-down menus, and your inbox defaults to one that says messages, right? Like email messages, but you can change the setting. And I cannot remember what the term is. It's either all communication or something like that. It might be submission comments is what it's called. So in your email, it will default to messages. Is it Stacy's nodding? Is it submission comments? Okay. So when you change it to submission comments, then your inbox will reflect those comments. And so the other way that this happens is that if you get those general Canvas reports that come to your email that tell you what students have been doing, you'll see that they've submitted stuff. Canvas will tell you when they've submitted stuff, and you might see those submission comments there, but they're totally out of context there, right? They're just in your inbox, like in your email, your campus email. So the easiest way to make sense of those comments is to go into your Canvas inbox, change it to submission comments. You'll see them there. And then you can click on that comment and it will take you to the assignment where that comment was made. So I've just gotten in the habit of every day when I check my email, I check my email first, and then I change that drop-down menu to submission comments. I also let my students know in my syllabus that I will check emails within 24 hours, and that submission comments, it may be 48 hours, just as a backup for myself, because sometimes I don't see it there. And then when I do my welcome video for the semester, I say, hey, this could be easy for me to miss. I totally want to dialogue with you about your assignment. If you put a comment in here, I might miss it the first time around. If it's something mission critical, right? If it's something you need me to know right away, follow up with an email, because then I know I'll catch it. And so I just build in some safeties for myself there in case I miss something.
Okay.
Great question. More questions?
Yes, ma'am. And I know you said you will look into that, but they wanted to know, how can they download all of the annotated papers at once?
You can't. Sorry, that's an awful answer to your wonderful question. You got to go into each and every one. To my knowledge, you have to go to each and every one.
Okay.
To download papers in general to print them, you would go into your gradebook. Up at the top, there's 3 buttons, and you can choose to download submissions. And even when this happens, it downloads them as a zip file. You still have to open each and every one and print them. Wah, wah. It's not very exciting. I know.
Okay, last question.
You bet.
Do you still get essays with run-on sentences and comma splices? And if yes, do you annotate those?
Oh yes, as an English teacher, my whole life might be run-on sentences and comma splices. That's a great question for as a segue for me to take a brief look with y'all at my commenting plan, you know, sort of my feedback plan for what I do with students. Personally, as someone who's commented on writing, student writing for years, I don't find that spending a lot of time correcting students' grammar or sentence structure in their papers translates into stronger student writing grammatically, right? There's a couple good reasons for that. If I do it for my students, they don't learn to do it for themselves. And most errors are pattern errors. Right? So a student who makes 1 run-on will probably make 30 run-ons, because it's not that they're just not trying, it's that understanding the context of how to not make a run-on is a pattern. So what's more useful for me to do is when I go in to give feedback on student work, right? I might come in and I might highlight a run-on sentence once, make a comment and say, this is a run-on sentence. And then I'm going to have some sort of tutorial available, because to say that term and do nothing else, even in an English class, even if we've read something about it, doesn't connect them with immediate support to make change. So if I say that's a run-on sentence, I suggest that you look into X or Y resources to help support. I'm either going to attach those resources right into my grading where I could use that attachment, or I'm going to reference a module that I've made in my course that's dedicated to, polished and clear writing. And maybe that thing's going to be full of YouTube videos. So I could have a whole module that I have YouTube videos or handouts, suggestions for how to address run-on sentences, how to address comma splices, right? And then I personally choose to create a hierarchy of what's most important. Most humans make comma splices all the time. Commas are really challenging. They're used in 7 different ways. So when I'm thinking about student writing, I'm thinking about what's going to be a gatekeeper for them in their workplace. What grammar errors are most likely to get them labeled, often incorrectly, as absent-minded thinkers. And I'm going to decide what's most important. And so for me, what's most important, apostrophes and homonyms, right? Words that sound the same, that mean different things. Not because I care more about them, but because I think those 2 things are what most readers who feel like they have a good grasp on grammar understand. And so they're places where judgment is more likely to happen. Most folks don't know how to use a semicolon, so they don't judge as harshly on semicolons, but they do know how to use an apostrophe. And so they judge more harshly on apostrophes. So that's where I'm going to help my students first. I'm going to help them where I think they're most vulnerable to being judged. And I'm going to make those decisions for them because it can be overwhelming to try and take on 30 different grammar rules in one class and learn stuff, right? Other stuff. So I'm going to try and create a hierarchy for them. What's most important? What can they layer the learning on with first? And then I'm going to offer feedback to them in their writing in context, right? Here you've got a run-on sentence. It's really hard for your reader to follow your thought when you've got multiple thoughts going at once. Here's a resource to help with that. And then if I really wanted to help make sure that they're thinking about that grammar piece or that clarity piece, I'm going to probably have an assignment called a feedback analysis assignment is what I'd call it in my class, where after they get feedback on something, they receive points. Their assignment is for them to read their feedback, identify 3 areas where they need to strengthen based on the feedback they received, and talk about the steps that they're taking or planning to take in order to be able to strengthen in those ways. So that if they've got a pattern of errors that I think is really disruptive for the clarity of their paper, they can tell me in that feedback analysis assignment, wow, I heard that I have a lot of run-on sentences and that made my writing really unclear. So I'm going to watch this video, this YouTube video that was uploaded into our class on run-on sentences. And I'm going to go back to my essay and I'm going to practice breaking up those sentences the way that my professor talked about. Maybe I use the highlight function when I'm commenting as a professor to show like this part goes together and this part's a new sentence. So it's not a run-on altogether. Recognizing that, again, those are patterns of error. So the frequency simply means that that error is not a place of known understanding for the student writer. Right? More errors of the same kind, to me at least, doesn't mean anything other than that error, the root of that error, is not a place of knowledge for the student. So if they had that knowledge, they could consistently reduce or eliminate that error that's showing up in a pattern in their paper. So last thing I'll show you before we chat is a resource I made you that walks you through my feedback plan. Why is that not showing? Oh. Thankfully, I have it as a Google document. It does not look like it attached. Bummer. Okay, hold on one moment, folks. Just one moment, please. I will go on a hunt for that and make it right. Here it is. Let us try that again. One more quick moment. Aha, all right. Thanks for your patience there. Let's put that back up for you. Ta-da! Now let's go to that thing. So this is my general feedback plan when I approach a giant batch of grading I've got to do, right? Feedback I've got to do. First and foremost, I set my grading posting policy for the assignment to manual, and I've included a link here for you so that you know what that means. But basically what that means is I'm telling Canvas, hey, don't give my students feedback until I'm done with the whole group. I don't want my first 5 students to have their feedback a week before students 15 through 20 do. All right, it takes me 2 weeks to grade major papers. So whoever goes first is going to get their feedback first. And that's just not cool. I might have a different feeling further through my grading. So I just pause time. And there's a way to tell Canvas, like, nope, just because I'm grading it doesn't mean I want them to see it yet. And Canvas calls that process setting the grade posting policy to manual. So I kind of neutralize the environment so I can do my grading for the whole batch before I send out any feedback to any individual students. And then once I've done that, so that I know I've got this cushion where I can make changes before students are going to see, I make a plan for how I'm going to engage. With each individual paper that I'm reading, the first thing I'm going to do is read that paper or that assignment through once, and I'm going to make a place for me to take notes. If I'm grading digitally, it's worth it to take my notes digitally because then I can copy and paste them should I want to. But I could do them handwritten too. Sometimes I'm sick of working on the computer too much, right? So read them through with the place to take notes. I make 0 annotation comments the first time I read through. It's just too tempting to get down my own rabbit hole on something. So I'm just going to read it through, make some comments to myself while I read. When I get done with that first read and my comments, I'm going to look over my notes and I'm going to complete the rubric. That may or may not mean I've put in a score, but even if I put in a score, my students do not see that score because I've set that posting policy to manual. So I go through and I do the rubric first after I've done my notes. Then I'm going to review my notes and decide which specific places. And for me, that means no more than 5 on that paper. So which specific places in that paper I want to annotate and comment. And for each spot, I'm going to take a moment to consider what I want to say. And I'm going to form what I say into an observation, right? What do I see? And then a suggestion or next step feedback. So I'm going to be super choosy about those annotations that I put on that paper, so that each time I communicate with my students, I'm clear, I'm focused, it's rich feedback, and it's not overwhelming for them to look at that paper. And because I set myself to only having 5, I'm picky choosy, and that's useful, right? It means that I'm saying the things that really matter to me. And since I've done the rubric first, there's a higher likelihood that what I choose to say on the paper connects with what I've chosen to make decisions about on the rubric. Right? It creates a bit more coherence there by doing that process. Then I'm going to create a brief 1 to 2 minute audio or 5 to 6 sentence typed comment in the overall comments box. Personally, my comments, I'm going to start by noticing and appreciating strengths and areas of focus, expertise, or interest. Even if that general assignment's pretty crummy, it didn't meet a lot of the requirements, I can still appreciate what they're interested in, or I can appreciate their previous expertise with something that I see showing through, even if that was a struggling assignment, right? I can notice them. Then I'm going to focus on noticing places they need to strengthen, and I'm going to connect them to resources. I might reference the rubric in my overall comment. I might reference my annotations, but I'm not going to restate my annotations because I'm thinking about these things as working in tandem, right? So I might reference that they're there, but I'm going to let the student look at those annotations. And there's a higher likelihood they're going to tell me if they can't get to those annotations if I reference them in the comments. They'll say, hey, I see that you said you wrote something, but I don't know how to find that. When appropriate, I'm going to offer to meet with my students and discuss further, right? And then I'm going to follow that up with an email. So if I find a paper that I'm like, man, if I were to accurately communicate on this paper, I would have to make 30 comments annotated. That's not going to work well for anybody. So I'm going to leave an overall comment to say, I think we need to dialogue more about this together. Let's look at it together. Do you have 15 minutes? And then we can talk it over. Okay. I'm going to, that should say norm. Thanks, autocorrect. In my comments, I might norm any challenging learning concepts or processes. It's a great place for me to remind them, like, this thing we're doing is really hard. Or lots of students struggle with this, right? To norm that experience of getting feedback suggestions. I'm going to highlight any existing course material that might be of use, right? I recommend you go back and look at this, or I attach this for you. If I made any digital notes while reading and I feel that they're germane, I could paste those in. And if I'm grading a ton of assignments and I've made a digital cache of my best version of comments, I might paste those in too. There's no shame, in my opinion, if you're doing multiple ways of giving feedback and you know that some of that's going to be individually tailored. There is zero shame in saying something really, really well to one student and then choosing to use that if it fits with another student. If you made a really, really concrete suggestion that's super clear to student 1, you could use that same suggestion to student 12. There's going to be other places where you're communicating individually with that student in your feedback, whether it's appreciating their strengths, other areas, etc. So you could always make that digital cache to pull from if you've said something really well once. Finally, I'm going to score it and submit it, knowing that I can come back. So I'm going to start with just reading it through, making some notes to myself. Then I'm going to engage with the rubric. Then I'm going to make 5 annotated comments, 5 or less annotated comments. I'm going to complete my overall comments at the end, whether those are audio or written, making sure to notice and appreciate, and then notice and suggest for strengthening. And on average, this takes me between 10 and 15 minutes per student to do. 4 to 5 papers an hour. But those are big papers. They're big papers. It's 4 to 5 an hour. And after I've graded 5, I'm going to stop and make some general reflections and notes for myself. Right? Because if I'm looking at, 4 to 5, 6 hours of grading to get through research papers, there's no way I'm in the same headspace for all of those 35 students. 0 chance. So after about 5, I'm going to stop and make some general reflections and notes for myself for that particular batch that I've done. I'm going to notice any trends that I'm seeing where students are struggling or where they're successful. Maybe those trends will end up as communications I make to the whole class through announcements or in an email. I'm going to note any trends in places of the assignment where there seems to be a disconnect, right? A hint to myself to go back and look at that assignment prompt I made or the way that I layered that assignment together. If consistently students don't seem to be doing a certain thing, I'm going to make sure I go back and I check, how did I lead them through that assignment? What did I write about it? Is there something confusing there? And then I'm going to check in with my body and my state of mind. Every 5 that I do, I'm going to check and see where I am. Do I feel tense? Am I frustrated? Am I hungry? Am I feeling overwhelmed or behind? And then I'm just going to take that moment to think, how might my feelings be impacting my feedback? Do I need a break? Do I need to change something up? Because I don't want where I am to impact how I communicate with my students. It will always will a little, but the more I can be clued in, the better chance I have of being my best version of myself when giving feedback. I'm going to check in with my environment. Where am I trying to grade? Back in the previous days when Rebecca and I were on the road show all the time, I graded a lot in hotel rooms, y'all. A lot in hotel rooms. At 10 o'clock at night, after a full day of being with, 30, 60 people, which is way over my threshold of interaction. And then I would come back to my hotel room and be grading. None of that is a good idea, right? But you got to do what you got to do. So I'm going to think about my environment. Is it loud? Are there distractions? How's the lighting? What's my chair feel like? Is there anything I can do to make that a better environment for when I give feedback? And after a few sets of 5, I'm just going to kind of check between those sets. Am I holding constant in my feedback? Do I find that I was more harsh on the first 5 students that I graded than I am on students 15 through 20? Right? Maybe by the time I've gotten to student 20, I've noticed through looking at the trends that generally students are misunderstanding this prompt. It's happened with a lot of them. And I'm like, I don't want to be this harsh. I think there might be something wonky about how I wrote this assignment. Because I muted that assignment, right? Because I came up and I said, nope, the early people are not going to get their grades before the later people. Realizing at paper 20 that I was a bit heavy-handed with papers 1 through 5 has 0 negative effects. I can go back to those first 5 and adjust something about my feedback, change my annotations, change their rubric, change their score. So that generally that pool of students who submitted are getting about the same thing. So to whatever extent it's useful for you, take this feedback plan, change it, adjust it to what feels right for you. What feels solid, makes sense with your discipline, but having that plan will make you feel more empowered when you've got a big heavy lift of grading to do. I find that it gives me a lot of peace of mind. Other things in your resource guides this week. The guides from Canvas on how to use commenting features, my guide for students, how to help them see their grades and feedback. And then I included several, I think they're great, web articles or resources on commenting on student work, much like rubrics, right? You think you're getting in for the tool and then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn about how I could use communicating with my students to help support their growth, right? I grow, they grow, everybody grows. So I've attached some of my favorites. Just next step places when you're ready to think about how to use that really intimate interaction of commenting on a student's assignment as a place to help support their continued learning. Dialogue with them, bring them into community. So a bunch of those are there for you. As always, take things one step at a time. Right? Check where you are and give yourself permission to just, toe in the water. Start with one new concept, maybe think about a grading plan, and then dive a little deeper into some of those resources about commenting. There's time. For our last couple minutes together, I'm going to invite you back to those earlier pages of our Google Doc. Lots of content today, lots of new ideas to chew over. I invite you to add something to what you got, or add a new question or something to what you need, or maybe some steps for yourself, what's next. And then please and please remind me where you are, what your comfort level is. Are you comfortable with 3CSN sharing what you share in these tables so that we can connect with all of you, our network, as we communicate with you on monthly or quarterly briefs, ways in which we reach out to you? If yes, thanks, that's awesome. Your words are more powerful than ours. If no, thanks. Thank you for letting us know how to respect your privacy and what you prefer. Either way works for us.
Nicole, I have a burning question. Do you want me to hold off
Hey, you bet.
or go ahead?
Go for it. Go for it.
So I have all my grading set to manual. That's how I figured out how to do it this semester. But one thing I've noticed is the last column in my grade book, which is the overall grade, because I do weighted grades. So that last column has the eyeball with the line through it, which tells me my students would not be able to see their overall grade. And the 3 dots usually let you post, but there's no option to post their overall grade, to have it viewable. Have you encountered that at all?
Maybe, but maybe I don't know. And so what I'm going to put down as the question is, what I want to look at is the relationship between when you set all assignments to manual. So this will be the way in which I go look at your question and then come back to you on email, is I'm going to figure out what happens if I set all assignments to manual? What's the relationship between that and the accuracy of their final grade category? Because it sounds to me like that's kind of what you're looking for, is what's the relationship between those two things, so that how accurate is that final grade? If that eyeball is there, it suggests that they can't see it at all.
Right.
Right.
My fear isn't the accuracy. I trust the accuracy is I want my students at all times to know where they stand in the class, because I do have weighted grades. It isn't as straightforward, but in Canvas and all other semesters, they've had access to it. But I've never.
I will check it out. Yeah, totally.
Could I add a possible solution?
Yeah, Jill, absolutely.
If you go to your home page, there's something called settings at the very bottom, like on the left of the navigation bar. And if you click settings, there's something that says more options. If you scroll down, it'll say, oh, you're doing it now. Okay, click more options. And then scroll down, and those boxes, see where it says hide totals in student grades summary? That's not checked. So that's probably why I don't check that. So I always have the totals, but maybe Stacy has it checked, hide totals in student grade summary. And if she unchecks it, or Stacy, if you uncheck that, maybe that would work. This is a maybe. I don't know. But I'm just.
Yeah, give that a look. I wonder if it auto checks. I wonder if there's some sort of if-then statement that if you choose to have all of your grades manually released, I wonder if it auto checks that box. So give it a test. Yeah, give it a test if you want to, or let me do a little bit more research and I'll send you an email. I can send the whole group an email if others are interested in this as well. Because I would hate for you to take something off, Stacy, in the middle of the semester and have it do something wonky with live students, right? Let me do a little bit more research for you, and I'll send that out to the group.
That would be great, because mine is not checked. It is not checked to hide their totals. So that's
super wacky.
Yeah.
We will dive into the Canvas pool and see what lives beneath the surface. I will get back to you on that, and I will send the information out to everyone on how to download when you've annotated and send it to a student. So both of those are coming for you. Just as soon as my little research mind gets to them. Probably Friday.
Nicole, this was good. This was helpful, and this was good to go through all of those things. It was.
Yay, I'm so glad.
Yeah,
it's not as good as donuts, but it's almost as good as donuts.
I especially liked when you talked about how you address the grammatical and spelling errors, because that's a conundrum for me. Sometimes
it's super tough. It's super tough.
If I don't, it's like, I've always thought it's like the bad teacher who says nothing when she sees something wrong. So I want to say something, but it's very, very time consuming. And like, what do you do? I used to overlook all of the spelling and grammatical errors. Then I decided, no, I'm going to change them and edit and fix and everything. But I don't know. I think you're right. The students, if you do it for them, they're not going to do it for themselves. what I've done is there's something I've been telling many students, use grammar check, use the Microsoft
Or
spelling.
Grammarly, the program Grammarly works great. It works great.
Or click
Yep.
F7. So I have seen some improvements. But I don't know, there's
And
only so much we can do. And then you just have to take them as they are and go with the quality of what they're saying. It's not going to be perfect. They're not graduate students.
And you know, those experts in writing and rhetoric, those folks who research in writing and rhetoric, would encourage us to remember, and it's hard in the moment, but encourage us to remember that that anytime students are learning something new, there's new content they're learning, their mind is going to have to negotiate between which is more important, learning the content or making it polished. And so for us as designers, we can think about, are we asking our students to build a house and paint it at the same time? And if we are, both of those processes are going to be flawed. So the more often in our design, we can ask them to just build, right? Just learn the concepts and separate that process from painting. Just build the house. Even if it's messy, just build it. Now let's go back and paint it. That helps too, right? If we can separate writing about something in a way that shows they understand the learning from writing about something cleanly, it helps them tremendously. It's very hard for students to negotiate those two different goals at the same time effectively.
Plus, in my opinion, the grammar check, the Grammarly, you have to know grammar first in order to be able to use those, because it's not perfect. It gives suggestions. And some people have different styles and, you know, writing styles. And sometimes it's okay to say something that's not grammatically correct if it's like a short, punchy sentence. That's part of their writing style. So I can't in good conscience recommend the grammar checkers, because you have to know grammar to begin with to make the decisions if it's where to put the apostrophe or what the context of what you're saying is. So I don't know, that's just something that's bothering me is the grammar. I feel like I want to correct everybody's things, but there's not really time to do that, and I don't know. So
I think trust your hunch, Jill, that not only is there not time, but again, if we go back to that idea of thinking about the relationship between being clear in what we want and that the process has to work for you and for students, right? If you go in and you do every single comment on their grammar, that's going to take you a really long time, and it's going to be pretty overwhelming for your students to absorb all that. They're going to have a hard time negotiating what's most important for them to fix, right? What's most important for them to focus on in the learning. And so that's where if we can capture a couple of those patterns of errors, maybe those become 2 of our 5 comments on a paper, and the other 3 are about the learning content or their ideas.
okay.
We're helping create that filter for them.
That's like 20 years of grammatical errors. So who am I? How can I just change things in one semester when they've had 20 or 30 years? And some people are international students and they can't help it. They're not native English speakers. That's how they are.
Absolutely.
You know, I have a suggestion for a future type topic.
Oh, how wonderful.
Okay, actually I have 2 suggestions. One, on the other end of the spectrum, positive statements, positive comments. I'm teaching lifespan psychology, and we get really good students. They're nursing students. They need to take this class for some reason to get into nursing programs. And they really are like the cream of the crop. They're like top A students. They get like 50 out of 50 on the exams, and they just write fantastic papers. So I'm wondering if you could have a little something on like giving positive feedback, because how many how many times can you say excellent, superb, this was
Right.
good, this
Right.
was great, you've mastered the content. Like, what kind of things do you say? Something about the positive feedback. Terrific,
Yeah.
fantastic, super duper. I'm thinking of some of the things that I write to students. Absolutely excellent. Showed great.
I will, I'll include that in the email. I have some moves that I make, but I'll look to see if
Okay.
there's any resources as well. And it's making my heart so happy that your question is about like, how can I more deeply engage with students when I want to show them that I see what an excellent job they're doing, right? How can I make that feedback to my students? Because that's motivational too, right? Students need to know what they're doing awesome, and they need to know how to strengthen. So how can we make those super quality comments about what they're doing that's awesome, right? They're thinking, they're doing, etc. That makes my heart happy. And you said you had one more. What was the other one?
Another one is about with discussions. Like how many times do you post, or do you have, I don't know if you have discussions in an English class. If you have discussions,
I do.
How do you do the grading? Do you, the students get an individual score, then they get a rubric score, then they get the additional comments. Okay, but when do you go in? When do you actually grade? Do you grade when the student submits and then there's 2 other people who have commented? Or do you grade and then give, like if there's 5 points, the student has to do 4 tasks, and then the 5th task is reply to 2 classmates.
Right.
So do you, student 1, do you grade her discussion first and give her 4 points, and then wait for 2 other people to post? Then she responds to 2 people, then you go back and then give her 1 more point? Or do you wait until there's her original post plus the 2 posts?
I wait until all of the activity on the forum should be coming to a close, right? And so I scaffold the assignment. So the initial post is due on a Tuesday. Responses are due on a Thursday, right? So initial post due on a Thursday, responses are due, or excuse me, on Tuesday, responses are due on Thursday. I'm probably not going to honestly go in and grade that until probably Sunday, a couple days. I'm going to give a couple extra days just in case somebody's a little late coming to that forum. But what I'm going to do during the week, rather than grade, is I'm going to interact, and I'm going to interact in a couple different ways. I could choose to post on the forum along with my students dialoguing with each other. And that really depends on the discipline and the personal teacher. I find more often than not that when I get on there, I muck up the good conversation they're having. They remember I exist and they stop talking to each other and start talking to me. So instead, what I'll do is I'll go through and read, and I'll pull out some really cool stuff that I see them talking about. And I'm going to put that in an announcement to the class, right? And I'm going to say, hey, there's some fantastic dialogue happening in the discussion forum this week. Folks are talking about this, or there's some really interesting questions coming out about this thing. And I'm just going to trickle those little carrots in an announcement and put a link to the forum and say, go check it out, right? Or if I notice that there's a fundamental error in the way that like half the class is talking about something, rather than trying to address it on the forum, which is going to call out a particular person or a particular post, I might put that in the announcement and say, wow, I see we're really struggling with this concept. Let me give you another way to think about this, right? To kind of broaden. And I'm going to do that through the announcements or through an email to the class, invite them back into that forum. Or if I notice that some folks are kind of skimming across the surface, there's a number of people who haven't really done a rich initial post, or their responses to each other are like, great idea, period. And I'm like, ooh, that's not deep engagement. I might put that in the announcement and say, hey, I saw some folks are making this move. There's a richer way to make this conversation. Here's some suggestions for starters. And I invite you to go back in, edit your post, edit your feedback, make that a little bit richer. I'll give you an extra 24 hours or whatever, just as a way to come alongside and just nudge that conversation without mucking it up too much by being in it. That seems to work really well for me. And then I'm going to use that rubric tool and those comment features when I go in and grade to either speak to what I've put in the announcements or give individualized feedback as I look. And that seems to help. That works for my class.
Okay, thank you for telling me.
You bet. You bet. I can't believe we only have one more week, folks. I've kept you over. You're so sweet to still be here. I will follow up an email with all of the stuff that I didn't get a chance to speak to directly or specifically in our session today. Next week's peer review, we're going to talk about how to peer review. You're going to have the option to peer review with each other. We're going to talk about how peer review can be a way in which we give feedback to students and how students can give feedback to each other. All things peer review next week. So look for an email from me in the next few days. I'm going to talk about ways to think about something you might want to share with your colleagues in this session when we get to peer review, knowing that you always have the option to be more of a listener, more of an observer, and to practice something through. But maybe you're feeling brave and you want to bring something and share it with your colleagues, have a chance to get some feedback on it.